I suppose I'd start with Barack Obama, who shares my values the absolute very most in current day times. Probably Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar, who most repulses me. That's a really, really, really long list. But I think I would have to begin with Senator Lindsey Graham. As a former Republican who still has many conservative values, whatever happened to that guy, I don't know, but he needs to be gone.
Someone I really think is doing a wonderful job is Michigan's Governor Whitmer. She has had to stand up to a lot of negativity within her own state, and the one that repels me the most is my own representative here in Ohio, Warren Davidson. He spews nothing but conspiracy theories in these emails that he's sending out to his constituents.
So the person I most admire throughout this crisis here in Texas is Beto O'Rourke. And I've been terribly impressed with the work that he does for all Texans. And the utter antithesis of this is Ted Cruz. He represents everything that is bad about this state. He's a dreadful human being. He doesn't care about the state. He does not care about the principles and the laws of this land. And I, as an immigrant, now a citizen, abhor his behaviour.
Welcome to LPTV's I'm Lisa Senecal. And I'm Maya May. Every Wednesday.
It's going to be one of those days, Maya.
I feel like it might be. But we're right up top. We got this. We know who we are. That's the most important part. And every Wednesday, we're speaking with you about the most pressing issues facing our country and lifting up the voices of women working to make real, lasting change and progress that benefits not only women, but all people, right? Because women's issues are America's issues.
And today we're talking about the climate crisis, how it intersects with race, gender, income, power, and access to voting, and how to activate and engage people in making the changes that are truly a matter of life and death and the future of our planet. As always, those most harmed are those with the least political and economic power and privilege.
Yeah, too often when we address climate change, we're talking about the long-term and not the very present right now issues, because Flint still doesn't have clean water. So some of us are left wondering where we fit into the equation. And our country is so divided that we often look at climate change, gender inequities, health disparities, racism, and poverty as separate issues. They're not.
No, they're not at all. Instead of creating solutions to inequity, Republicans just want to create obstacles between the ballot box and young people, BIPOC folks, women, and those living in poverty. Disenfranchisement is the Republicans' 2022 campaign strategy.
Yeah, so joining us on today's show is attorney Elizabeth Yeampierre, steering committee co-chair for the Climate Justice Alliance and executive director of UPROSE, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization.
And we're also going to be speaking with psychologist, author, and sustainability strategist, Dr. Renee Lertzman. She'll share how psychology can help solve the climate crisis. But first, we're really excited to introduce you to Fred Wellman. Fred has been called a lot of things, pilot, major, though we promise Fred has not bitten anyone, at least to the best of our knowledge. He's been called a veterans activist, a strategist, an entrepreneur, a leader. These days, he's called the executive director of the Lincoln Project, and we are so lucky for that. So welcome, Fred. We're really happy to have you here.
That's great to be here, ladies. It's my first time. And checking out Maya and I think we didn't coordinate.
Oh, we're matching. We did coordinate.
Look at that. Right?
You guys called each other. You called each other
Yeah.
before the show, and nobody called me, and that's all right. I'm not going to.
I don't know what to tell you. It's not my fault.
You're in the same queue.
Yeah, just
my
know
girlfriend
that the
says what
questions
to
we
wear.
were going to ask you,
Hey,
we're just
you know,
ditching
I'm
all
just
the
saying.
questions, and
There you go.
You know, all bets are off at
My
this
girlfriend
point.
says what to wear. Heather says what to wear. I wear what Heather says. That's how it works. So, I'm a simple man.
That's the way we like it.
That
on
is,
Things. So
yep.
that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the road to a healthy relationship. You should just really
Indeed.
do whatever Heather says, and things
There
will
you
be
go.
good.
It's good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Good to see you too. I'm really glad you were able to take the time to be here with us tonight. I know you've had your hands full. You took over the reins as executive director at the Lincoln Project. How long ago now?
February 1st. So I guess that's a month and a half. I mean, it's been kind of a busy week, busy month, but it's exciting. Yeah. It's been an interesting time.
Yeah, I was going to say, those are Lincoln
We're really
Project
lucky that you stepped in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we talked a little bit back and forth yesterday, Fred, and one of the things I mentioned that you are a veteran, and we had been chatting about the difference between the Biden administration and Trump on women's issues. And you actually know one of the women who's just been promoted to 4-star general, who was sidelined, looked over.
And a spectacular office. Yeah. And a spectacular. Yeah. I served 22 years in the Army. I graduated from West Point back in 1987. My first tour of duty, I was a scout helicopter pilot, and I volunteered to go get a station in Korea, which in 1988 wasn't a glamorous assignment, but I knew I'd fly a lot. So I ended up in Korea in 1988, and I arrived at Camp Page up near the DMZ. And my company commander is a guy named Jim Richardson. And his wife was a fellow lieutenant named Laura Richardson, who was a Black Hawk pilot at the time. And we got to know each other very well. As a matter of fact, she was pregnant when I met her, and I think I drove her to the hospital in Seoul when they had their baby. I was there, and Laura's career has been nothing short of spectacular. It's funny when you meet people in the Army, you'll meet people like, that's a really good officer, and then you'll meet an officer and you're like, yeah, they're going to be a general, right? and there's a few, and Laura was always that officer. We reunited again in 2003 in Iraq when she was a lieutenant colonel and a battalion commander in the 101st Airborne Division of one of our air assault battalions, and she's just progressed through the ranks. And I'm thrilled that she's been promoted to full general. I'm thrilled she's taking over Southern Command, which is just a huge statement of where we are as the United States military. And I'm also angered that they had to wait until President Biden was the president because they were concerned that President Trump would not approve it. And it just goes to the political machinations that infected our military under Trump and Trumpism. That our military officers had to consider a promotion of the most deserving of officers based on the political whims of essentially misogynists. But here we are.
And a draft dodger.
Yeah.
And a draft dodger, right? Well, you guys. So the history of me being a part of the Lincoln Project. Those maybe your viewers don't know. I joined the Lincoln Project in August. I was one of our last big joins as a senior advisor for Veterans Affairs, and I spent a lot of my time focusing on we're not really an issues shop, right? But I did focus on the things that mattered. I weighed in heavily on the fact that veterans weren't receiving their medicines and prescriptions via the U.S. Postal Service, and we were able to raise the Postal Service issue to a pretty loudly in early September. We focused on the fact that President Trump was blaming Gold Star families for giving him COVID. If you remember that little incident where he said the military people hugged him and kissed him, and then that we figured out at the Lincoln Project that he was talking about a Gold Star Families event for the families of fallen warriors. And a lot of things we talked about a lot during the campaign was that while Trump claimed to be, a supporter of the military and the Republicans were supporting the military, in truth, it was all performative. And for families, and for our military families, it really affected them. And one of the biggest ways that we highlighted and still affecting them is they diverted over $7 billion in the military construction funds for his ridiculous wall. And that translated to specifically at the 101st Airborne, where I served with Laura Richardson, a daycare center was supposed to be built. The middle school was falling down. They took that money that had been in the works for years and sent it to his wall. So, under Trump, the performative military support was truly nothing but. And I think we told that story effectively. And here we are. So, yeah, I'm thrilled. Laura, now General Richardson, which is humbling to even know somebody that rank. And clearly, here I am, and she's a 4-star general, but nonetheless, I think that says a lot about my career in the military.
You're not doing so bad, Fred.
I don't know. I'm retired. So, but I'm just thrilled. Honestly, it's just, there's people who just deserve that. And it's not about being a woman. It's not about, getting special privileges. Laura Richardson is a perfect example of an officer who stepped into the breach and served with honor and dignity and just courage. I mean, to be a battalion commander of a air assault battalion, which is about 300 soldiers, 24 Black Hawk helicopters. She led the assault into Iraq in 2003, all the way to Mosul. Her battalion lifted hundreds of troops, thousands of troops from where we were all the way up to Mosul. I remember one of our last missions together in 2003 or 4, maybe. We took a huge brigade of troops down to Anbar province, because there was a terrorist training camp we discovered in the desert. And we launched in the middle of the night and assaulted on this terrorist training camp. Just a brilliant commander, a privilege to serve with. So this isn't really about the most capable woman in the room. This is about being one of the most capable officers I've ever known in my career. So honestly, it's just to see her stand next to the president. My old boss pinning his wife's 4th star, and he's a 3-star, which is pretty cool. It was really remarkable. So I think I'm thrilled for the United States Army. I'm thrilled for the United States military to recognize that the capabilities of some of these talented officers that I had the privilege to know.
This is so great. Do you think now that it's out there, I mean, it wasn't surprising really that Trump would pull something like this, but now that it's out there, do you think like the general tide is changing in the military and that people are looking to see true meritocracy and women being able to rise through the ranks and people being able to rise through the ranks?
I think in many ways there's been. I'm sorry to cut you off. That's so rude of me. I apologize. That's so rude. I'm eager to answer that question. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Incredibly rude. Such a great question, right? And I think you convince yourself in the military that it is a meritocracy. I do. And I think you can, but you do see the inklings. I mean, the fact is when you see the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the picture of, and under Trump, you saw the picture of the Joint Chiefs, and that picture was all white men. And then eventually a black man with the Air Force in 4 years. It worries you, right? I mean, for me, I don't believe it represents, at times our military. And so I am thrilled to see that the right people are being promoted. We know from the Me Too movement, I learned from that. I mean, I was an imperfect leader. Even till recent years, I was one of those imperfect leaders and didn't see what I didn't see. And learned a lot of lessons and made a lot of mistakes. But it's good to see the conversations very much in the open about equal rights for our leaders who deserve it. It's important that we talk about the rampant problems with sexual harassment and sexual assault within the military that has been brewing for years. It's horrifying to see the way women are treated often in the military. If you ever want to just ruin your opinion of humanity, go to Marine Corps Times website and look at the comments on any article that highlights a woman, and it'll break your heart. So while I do believe the military has made great progress, I also believe that a 250-year-old or so institution that is the United States military has a very long way to go. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we do. And it's not just gender discrimination and sexual harassment and assault in the military, but we know racism obviously is a huge issue that has just been, I don't think it's gotten worse. I think it's gotten exposed more. People have been given permission to be more awful, more in public than they were feeling comfortable doing before. And that's become such a huge piece of what the Republican Party now is. And now going into the 2022 election, racism is really, that is the plan. We're going to find ways to disenfranchise voters. And it is nothing other than, all of this election security bullshit is nothing more than too many Black people showed up and voted, and we don't consider their votes legitimate. So we're going to find ways to make sure that they're not able to vote next time. And I think I said it certainly this week. The Lincoln Project is all over this one.
I think it's the fight of our lives, right? I think I said this yesterday, I think on our podcast. I'm very proud of the Lincoln Project that we're stepping into this. I think it's funny. I just saw a tweet before I got on here. Somebody saying, "Oh, you guys did some amusing ads." I'm like, yeah, that's really not. We did that. We did ads. That's true. But we did some other stuff. I did a call today with Nate Nesbitt. I don't know if you guys know Nate. So Nate Nesbitt is our director of strategic partnerships, part of our political team and our communications team during the campaign. And we had a call with a partner organization. Oh my God. I mean, talk about humbling. Nate knows more about politics, knows more about the interactions of important groups like Fair Fight under the remarkable Stacey Abrams in Atlanta and other organizations and other organizations we partner with a lot of organizations during the campaign. And so Nate has been instrumental in our efforts to fight these rollbacks of voter rights, the efforts to get out the vote in local areas. We did a lot of work. Nate literally moved to Georgia during the runoff and led our efforts of partnerships in Georgia. It was so much, we use so much more than just, a few ads. Yeah, we do ads, but we were out there, helping get out the vote in rural Georgia. He did quite a bit of work to make sure the Black vote was counted in Savannah. It was easy to get a lot of folks focused on Atlanta. So these laws they've created, especially in Georgia, are laser focused on disenfranchising Black voters. You can see it in the fact they want to limit early voting on Sundays when we know it's Souls to the Polls Day, where traditional Black churches load their folks on buses and head straight to the polls. Well, if you move the hours back a little early, it means they can't go straight from church to the poll. It's such an insidious, laser-focused targeting of a specific voter demographic that has efforts to roll out the vote. The same thing with providing food and water in line. well, we're going to reduce the number of polling areas, so you have to wait in line for 8 hours. And now we're not going to let, which has been, again, a black voter turnout effort, defeat folks. It's just so blatantly racist and so obviously fake in the reasoning for it that it's shocking that in 2021 they think they can get away with it. And the Lincoln Project,
Truly.
I'm proud to say, as executive director, ain't, you know?
Yeah. I think that's what's so great having you as the executive director is you are present and aware of that situation. So I am happy that you are on board for sure. And I'm glad that you were able to be here with us tonight and share everything with us. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah. I'm happy to help. And
thank you,
appreciate
Fred. We're thrilled you're here.
I love you guys. I love the show. I'm so glad to have you on the team. I had some wonderful conversations. When I first took the job, I had the chance to call both of you, and you educated me about what your views are and where you guys stand, and your voice is so important. Your viewers are important to us. One thing that's been the most humbling part of taking this position, and I kind of kept it quiet, to be honest. I think I updated my Twitter bio, and that was, there is important work to be done here at the Lincoln Project, and it isn't about me. It is about Nate. It is about Kate. It's about Ryan. It's about Marco, who gets up at 3 a.m. in Hawaii to take our meetings. It's you guys and your remarkable voices and the team that supports the show. And then on top of that, it's these incredible donors and supporters who have seen the terrible things, many of them untrue, many of them steeped in twisted logic, and stood by us. And so for me, while this has been a long period as we've navigated some very turbulent waters in this pirate ship, I get up every day because of you ladies and our donors and our supporters. And it's the privilege of a lifetime. I mean, I've worked my whole life to get to a point where I can at least have some voice, and to have an organization like the Lincoln Project with guys like Nate down in Atlanta and you guys on here telling our story. It's humbling. So thank you. Thanks for having me. And if I could ever join again, I'd love to.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Fred.
We would love that. Thank you very much. It was great having you.
Likewise.
Good night. Super inspirational, and it just makes me happy to know that we're a mission-driven organization and we are going in the right direction. So speaking of, we asked a lot of y'all, do you have a favorite political figure that genuinely shares your values? But then also, who are you most repelled by? You had answers for both, but let's start with something positive here. We have Mari Machado dropped us her thoughts from Facebook. She says, I genuinely admire Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. They want to care for all, not just the elite. They come from middle-class homes with working parents and all the trappings that come with that. And with Kamala, you have a person of color from immigrant parents who has realized the American dream and works to make those opportunities equally available to all. Best of all, they are strong women.
I love that. We also heard from Cher Cariz, who reached out on Facebook and says, Bernie Sanders, I am a Vermonter, so shout out for Bernie Sanders, even though we don't always agree on everything. I still, Bernie. Bernie Sanders shares my values for a better, kinder society. Trump, Graham, Cruz, and McConnell are self-gratifying politicians with no morals. Green is a showboating disaster. Bring back Republicans like Mitt Romney that still have morals. We may not agree, but we can still respect. I appreciate that so much because, the Mitt Romneys of the world are a dying breed. Unfortunately, they're so, you can count the Republicans with strong morals on one hand at this point. So I do appreciate that, there are a few folks left out there who are trying to do the right thing. And as a person said, we don't all agree on everything all the time, but those are the kind of folks that you can actually have policy discussions with and debate issues in a respectful way. And how about policy?
Remember that? Policy.
That's kind of nice.
That was the thing. Yeah. We'd love to hear more of your thoughts on this. So you can give us a ring at 646-374-8339. So let us know what you're thinking. You can tweet us using hashtag We're Speaking or leave a comment for us on Facebook. And shout out to everyone who's watching us live on YouTube. We love the community that you are building with us. We know you are on fire in the chats, watching it live. So thank you for being here with us. We will be right back after a short message from the Lincoln Project.
I want crystal clean water and air. I want beautiful, clean air. We have now the lowest carbon. If you look at our numbers right now, we are doing phenomenally.
I want to tell you about my U.S. representative. I am so proud of him. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. His name is Raul Ruiz. And the most recent wonderful thing that he's done is that he's helped to get the COVID vaccine to our farm workers, our local farm workers. That is Representative Raul Ruiz from California in Riverside County.
How many young girls are raised today too afraid to speak their own minds, scared of being attacked for having an opinion, fearful of being called bossy, arrogant? How many of them just stay silent? It's time to turn the corner on the all too familiar phenomenon of what happens when a woman speaks her mind. Because that's just what we are seeing today with Kristen Clark and with Vanita Gupta. Two brilliant and qualified women nominated for powerful roles within the Biden administration, smeared and vilified despite their qualifications and widely accepted views. Would this be happening if these were men nominated? What are you afraid of, senators? It's time to throw those double standards overboard for Clark and for Gupta. And for all the young women out there who yearn to lead, if only given examples to follow. It's time.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Yes, representation matters because diverse perspectives at the table help us come to better decisions. And it's like we're just always working twice as hard to be considered half as good. Lisa, you know what that's all about.
Yeah, and it's not just the two women, Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, who were featured in that. It's also Deb Haaland and Neera Tanden. They managed to tank Neera Tanden's candidacy, her potential appointment, because apparently white men are allowed to say anything they want. Donald Trump can, call women horse faces and all the other god-awful stuff he said about people. But Neera Tanden can't call Mitch McConnell Voldemort or, sorry, you are no longer able to hold a cabinet position. And, you look at those images and I don't know, there's just something not quite like white about it.
That is it right there. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
That is exactly it. And it's so frustrating because we see it again and again. And I find myself, always in situations where I have to police my own language because it's like, it's white America is not used to strong women of color having a voice. And so we speak up, and this is the, kind of what ends up happening. And so, it's been frustrating, but the tide is changing, right? Tell me it is.
It is. Yeah. We have Kamala Harris as vice president, and she was obviously, with the name of the show, she was the inspiration for this because she wasn't going to be silenced. She wasn't going to be talked over by a white man who didn't want to give her space, and America gave her space. So I do have. We have a long way to go, but I'm optimistic.
Same. And that's why I'm super excited about our next guest, because she is one of the women who are out here making space. All right. It's attorney Elizabeth Yeampierre. She is an award-winning advocate around sustainable development, climate adaptation, and community resiliency. Her vision for an intergenerational, multicultural, and community-led organization is the driving force behind UPROSE, where she is the executive director. We are fortunate to have her with us today. Elizabeth, welcome to We're Speaking. We're so happy to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be in conversation with you today.
Yes. So I want to start off with some vocabulary. Environmental racism. What is it?
Environmental racism has to do with the historic discriminatory citing of environmental burdens in communities of color. It literally starts as far back as the slave quarters, when we were surrounded with infrastructure, with the most unwelcome uses. Because the impression was that we wouldn't be able to fight it. So you see communities like Houston that are surrounded with petrochemical industries, and people have dioxin in their bloodstream. You see the Gulf South, which is completely saturated with extraction and with fossil fuel extraction. You see places like Puerto Rico that has 23 Superfunds on that tiny little island. And so everywhere where you see people of color living in the United States and low-income communities like folks in West Virginia, in Appalachia, you're going to see all the toxic, polluting infrastructure. And that is environmental racism. The fact that you would not cite those facilities in a white privileged community, but you are okay with doing it and dropping tons of NOx, SOx, PM 2.5 in the lungs of our children and our elders. That's environmental racism.
Yeah, and it's by
we
design.
Talked in our opening. Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. We talked in our opening about how all of these things are interconnected. The climate crisis, racism, people trying to obstruct the ability for Black and brown folks to vote, because we know the people who are in office are going to make a big difference because they are the people with power. What do you see as the most potential for organizing now that we have a Biden presidency? Is there a greater potential to be able to organize and make some real progress?
Well, there is an opening, and we've been organizing for years. In New York, we passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and the Biden administration is using a lot of the language in terms of moving about 40% of resources to frontline communities that are disparately impacted by climate change and the ones least responsible for creating it. But none of this would be a success if we hadn't been doing the work for so many years in all our communities across the country. And so you've got folks in Indian country that have been fighting, in Standing Rock, and you've got people in Detroit that are looking to reindustrialize their city, and in the Gulf South to stop fracking and all of those different policies that have been putting us in harm's way. And then in New York City, we're looking at our significant maritime industrial areas and asking for a green reindustrialization so that the new industry is one that's building for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And the Biden administration is really open to that and working really closely with us to ensure that the people that they appoint and the policies that are coming out of the White House are addressing the needs of the most vulnerable in the United States. And that is really exciting to see that happening, particularly right now when the communities that have been impacted by environmental racism are also the ones that are suffering from COVID. So this is a good time to start strengthening those relationships and to make sure that the kind of governance we have really honors frontline solutions and is working in tandem with us.
Yeah, it does feel like we're starting to make some progress here. And I was talking to my mom about this earlier, and she was like, environmental justice, like climate change, like how is that a race issue? And I was kind of sharing with her some of the things that you have spoken about before. And I would love to hear more about the different local groups and how you're bringing them together on a national scale and how that's helping kind of build power overall.
Well, we're really, thank you for that question, because the truth is that there isn't a single organization or a person who can solve this problem. And so frontline communities have been working with each other for a long time. And the Climate Justice Alliance is a national alliance of frontline leaders all over the United States. It includes Puerto Rico and Guam. And we've got folks that are really putting down infrastructure, engaging what we call a just transition all over the country. In New York, we've got the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, which is a citywide alliance made up also of groups and communities that are disparately impacted by environmental burdens. And we also have New York Renews, which is a statewide coalition of over 200 members, where you've got folks from New York City and in different parts of the state working together to make sure that we can operationalize a just transition. And what a just transition is a move away from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And it includes different scales, including food sovereignty, all the things that are going to be impacted by climate change. And so on a citywide level, it's New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Statewide is New York Renews. And nationally, we've got the Climate Justice Alliance. And there are a lot of other groups that are working on climate change, but we're working at the intersection of racial injustice and climate change. We literally, our communities are living in the midst of all of the isms. And so we don't have the luxury of picking one issue over the other. We think that we need to put in a climate lens in literally all decision-making, change governance, move the resources to the front line, and make people in our communities decision makers in planning and zoning, and in making the decisions that are going to take us out of harm's way. So this is happening everywhere, all over the country. And it's a very leaderful, intergenerational, mostly women-led movement where we share expertise and resources on a daily basis.
I love hearing you talk about the local organizations and the decades and decades and centuries of work that's been going in. But there are very large organizations, and the Red Cross does a lot of really good work, but they're not close to the people. And I've heard you talk about the problem with having, in response to some of these climate disasters, like in Puerto Rico, having organizations who aren't close to the people in the communities come in and not work in tandem and really listen to what it is that local organizations are trying to do. Can you talk to us more about, the road to hell is paved with good intentions?
It is, and it is really disrespectful of people on the ground for you to come in from another community thinking that you have the solutions to their problems. The truth is that people in Puerto Rico, like people in the Gulf South and people in Kentucky and in Oakland, they know what they need. And so the question really is, if you want to support, you don't supplant local leadership. You have to build equity and alignment. You have to center racial justice and equity. And that means that you don't use sort of this old school model of speaking for people of color and deciding that you know what the solutions are. That's a new kind of colonialism. What you do is you ask, what do you need and how can we support you? And if you do that, if you show up and you support with a lot of humility, you find out that people are talking about agroecology. They're talking about taking entire communities off the grid. They're talking about how they can access the sun and access the ocean as a way of creating a font of renewable energy, that they're building resiliency between themselves and they're taking care of each other and they're creating mutual aid societies in their communities in the face of despair, in the face of all the things that happen in Puerto Rico and are happening all over the United States. It's people that are taking care of each other. And if you're thinking about climate change, well, what if the funding wasn't there? What if the resources weren't there? People would have to depend on each other in order to survive. So investing in the front line and investing in the grassroots and in people who are actually doing the work should be a priority. And there is what I think is a very racist way of thinking about communities, that somehow all we do is ask for things and reach and do outreach. The truth is that our communities are getting legislation passed. Our organization just launched the first community-owned solar cooperative in the state of New York. We were able to attract a $200 million grant from a state agency from NYSERDA to invest in offshore wind in South Brooklyn. We we're part of a coalition that passed the most aggressive climate legislation in the United States. And so we're community building, we're developing intergenerational leadership, we're doing all those things. And so there's a deficit-based expectation that people have when the leadership is Black, Indigenous, or people of color that doesn't really tell the story of how we hold space, how we build community, and how we're literally transforming the landscape and getting the legislation necessary to operationalize this big collective vision that we have. So in Puerto Rico, just like in the Gulf South, people can't be coming in for the selfie. They need to be able to show up in a way that builds and doesn't supplant local leadership. We call that, and folks who write about this, they call that disaster capitalism. That's not how we should be building community. And so it's not that we're ungrateful. It's just that we have the solutions, and a real ally, someone who stands in solidarity with us, knows how to work with us in a way that honors the solutions that are coming from our communities.
I love that. And I have one more question for you because we are running out of time, but I definitely want to know about this direct connection to the land that you speak of, because when you talk about solar power and being off the grid, and it seems like that's historically rooted as well. And so I'd love if you could share a bit about that.
Absolutely. There is a sister named Shalonda Baker who just wrote this book called Revolutionary Power. And I would suggest that you read that, although we've got a lot of things that you could read. But the truth is that as people of African and Indigenous ancestry, we have always lived within our carbon footprint. And our tradition has always been to honor Mother Earth. And so we can't just rely on techno fixes, what we call false solutions and techno fixes. We really need to embrace the culture of the diversity of people that live in places like New York and California and Texas and all of these places, because those are the people that are going to drive our ability to really survive the changes that are coming as a result of climate change. And so that's not something to be managed. That's something to be nurtured and something to be supported, because that relationship with the earth is something that goes back to our historical traditions and even our spiritual traditions. And so I'm really happy that you asked that question, because people don't understand that we have an understanding of science, and we have an understanding of history, and we have an understanding of how we heal each other in our communities. And that's all rooted in our traditions. And that's something that is going to make it possible for us to strengthen social cohesion in the face of climate change. So thank you for that. And you see in countries like, if you look at what's happening in Africa on the River Niger, and how the River Niger has basically been contaminated, and how they have not only contaminated it and made it impossible for people to grow food, and they have had toxic exposure and have gotten sick. They've also, as a result of the westernization of those parts of Africa, taken away the traditions that would have made the people who lived along the River Niger their ability to survive. And that's happened all over the United States, all over the Americas and the Caribbean. And so we're reclaiming that. We're reclaiming that power. And because we are not the ones responsible for creating climate change, but we are the ones that are going to be the most impacted and have been the most impacted in the past few years. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so and thank you for all the work you're doing and pushing these issues to the forefront, because it is so necessary to say it over and over again, because sometimes it takes a while for people to get it.
Yes, some people more than others. So I appreciate hearing your voice on this. People who look like me need to spend a lot more time listening.
Well, we welcome allies, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about climate justice. And I hope that people will go to the Climate Justice Alliance website and learn a lot about all of the different groups that are doing this work across the United States. So, gracias.
Yes, no, gracias a ti. So thanks so much for being with us tonight, and we hope to have you back. That was amazing, because we have so much to learn. We're going to look at a clip real quick right here so you can see exactly what we need to learn, because it looks like we're a little bit confused about climate change.
Social media posts have falsely accused both leftist and right-wing radicals, Antifa and the Proud Boys, respectively, of contributing to the fire.
Nothing is real. Our weather is not real. Every weather event now is manufactured.
So it was all working great until the day it got cold outside. The windmills failed, like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died.
Cause there's government snow right here. Just falls off your hand, don't even make it wet.
Not melting.
What the?
No drip.
No drip.
No drip.
Government snow. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Did you know that was a thing?
How did you know that was a thing? I had heard a long time ago that Karl Rove controlled the weather, but apparently we've moved on from that, and now Democrats control the weather, which you would think, were that true, we wouldn't be seeing climate crisis as we were just talking about. But hey, it doesn't have to make sense for the crazies to believe it. So.
Yeah, exactly. And well, I think this is a perfect time because I watch that and I go, oh, for fuck's sake. And guess what that means? It's time.
It's that time.
To talk. It's that time. Each week, we like to take a few minutes to shine a spotlight on a few folks whose actions have exceeded our expectations and who have truly outdone themselves in being deceitful, dishonest, and anti-democratic. And we give them an award for it. It's our Oh, for fuck's sake award. And it's our way of saying, you're horrible. We see you. Folks, here are this week's nominees.
Our first nominee this week is Greg Abbott. Hey, Texans, your governor has declared mission accomplished against COVID-19. You have a 10% positivity rate, you say? No problem. Greg says, take off those masks. Visit the homes of friends, neighbors, and relatives, but not his home. The governor's mansion is still off limits because, frankly, Greg cares much more about his life than yours.
But let's not forget Ron DeSantis, nominee. Are you rich and well-connected? Do you donate to the governor's campaigns? If you do, then it's champagne and vaccination dreams. You get a vaccination and you get a vaccination. Somehow they ran out of vaccinations and they are being investigated by a Florida watchdog.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And our final nominee this week is Lauren Boebert. Lauren, because showing up for work in a Viking helmet would seem normal for you, and for thinking that Ted Cruz is worth letting in from Mexico, but not those seeking asylum, and for caring more about your seditionist friends' access to the Capitol than actually preserving our democracy, and generally being a dumb version of Sarah Palin. You are our final nominee this week.
You can still vote in the OFS poll along with more than 9,000 people who've already weighed in, including Rick Shank, who tweeted us saying, this poll is too difficult. I grew up in Florida and refused to live there again, just bailed out of a horrible 2 years living in Texas and have family in Colorado and won't ever live there either. And the political climate fostered by these three ignoramuses plays a significant part. Or you could do what this follower did and just manually check all three boxes. So please, the poll is live on our Twitter at LPTV. We will announce the winner of the losers at the end of the show. Coming up, our next guest, Dr. Renee Lertzman. But before that, let's hear from some of our audience members. We asked which politicians you love and which ones you don't.
The mayor of San Antonio, Ron Newberg, he's been a jewel through this whole pandemic. And even though he's had a lot of bad input from the governor, he's really kept on track on keeping the people in San Antonio aware of what's going on.
The first thing we need to know to combat radicalism and veterans who are doing things like storming the Capitol is figure out how they're getting radicalized. And there's three possibilities. They're radical and then they join the military. They get radicalized while they're in the military, or they get radicalized after they leave the military. And my suspicion is probably that people are getting radicalized while they're in the military, and then when they leave the military and they go home.
I've been loving the Lincoln Project podcast. It's actually super informative. You hear a lot of information, some of it a little bit scary, but definitely need to know stuff. You can subscribe and listen to the latest episode of the Lincoln Project podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found.
Yeah, watching that little clip of the podcast, certainly one of the many things that can make us feel overwhelmed and paralyzed by a problem that's so immense. It's really difficult to know where to begin. And climate change is that issue for an awful lot of people. Joining us now is psychologist, author, sustainability strategist, Dr. Renee Lertzman, to talk with us about moving from paralysis to actually making progress. So welcome, Dr. Lertzman. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So as I was just saying, climate change is this massive, complicated crisis, and it's really easy to feel totally overwhelmed. You speak about a term called window of tolerance. Can you talk to us about what that window of tolerance is and how it relates to becoming completely overwhelmed?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's extremely important that we keep in mind that climate crisis, climate change, environmental issues are in fact incredibly traumatic on numerous levels in different ways for different people, but that we're talking about existential threats. And so if we really keep that front of mind, it helps us make sense of the variety of ways that people are not engaging, are engaging, or somewhere kind of in between. And to help me navigate that, I've really turned strongly to insights in clinical psychology, in neuroscience, public health sector that help kind of provide some frameworks and ways of making sense of this. And the window of tolerance is actually a term that was coined by Daniel Siegel, a well-known neuroscientist, what's also called interpersonal neurobiology, which recognizes that it's basically about relational neuroscience, that we're not individualized, kind of atomized beings, but that we are always influencing each other all the time in terms of how we respond to the world and make sense of what's happening. So window of tolerance is a very powerful and very simple concept that can bring this into focus, which is that we all have thresholds. We have thresholds where we either become, in the neuroscience lingo, dysregulated, or where we can stay regulated. That is, to stay engaged with what's happening, to stay connected with reality, while remaining whole, while remaining integrated and accessing our best capacities. And it's very easy for us to get knocked out of our window of tolerance, and that can look like going into almost like a withdrawal, depressive kind of what's called collapse. And then the other side of that window of tolerance tends to look like a real rigidity, like a the rage, the anger, where there's just kind of a hardness about that, right? And it's very natural and normal for us to flow between, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with going into collapse or becoming activated and angry. But really the task is, how do we build this capacity to stay within that window and to stretch the window? So really the question is, how do we as community, how do we together support each other and ourselves to stay in that window where we are alive and present, but yet effective?
Yeah, it seems like it's a bandwidth issue, right? Like, and I'm super into like brain hacks and neuroscience-y stuff to try to improve my life. And when I think about my life, I'm a single mom, I have a teenager, and I'm trying to balance 1,000 things. And, I'm a woman of color and Black in America. And so I have all of these issues and priorities. And I'm just curious as to how you see that that bandwidth affecting communities of color, and where you see that in the picture.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, it's entirely situational. It's entirely contextual, how we are engaging and relating with these crises. So there is no sort of generalizable response. But without question, vulnerable communities, people of color, people who are most directly impacted are having a entirely different kind of level of having to navigate and remain in this window of tolerance without question. So I think that for me, what's powerful is being able to name and to acknowledge that this is in fact I heard some of your previous speaker, touching on these dimensions of trauma, and being able to really acknowledge that allows people to then kind of fortify what does resilience look like in this context? What does it mean to be resilient right now?
The other term I've heard you talk about in your TED Talk, which is great, is attunement. And I'm definitely going to let you describe it, because I will mutilate the concept if I try to. But it, just like a window of tolerance, it seems like it's very situational. And depending on your circumstances, it is either easier or far more difficult to be able to get into attunement in relation to work you want to do on climate change if you have so many other layers of challenges in your life.
Right. Well, attunement is essentially about being present with ourselves and developing the capacity to be present with others, which is an extremely high bar as human beings, right? And so when we think about attunement, it's the building block of relationship. There isn't really relationship. There really isn't connectivity without the ability to be attuned to oneself, self-managing, self-regulating, kind of self-governance in terms of one's own reactivity, one's own tendency to go into projection, to go into polarizing, to go into a contracted state of being. That's in the ability to internally be attuned, to develop the capacity to sense what's happening with oneself, a self-witnessing, is really the basis for being able to be present and attuned to others, and particularly others who are different, who have threatening perceptions and views, who are who for whatever reason are triggering for us, incredibly hard to be attuned. The point here is it's not about sort of having a kumbaya, like let's bond and accept everyone and not access the anger and the activism. It's really about recognizing that if we want to be effective as organizers, as activists, as citizen advocates, community, active within our communities, it's very hard to do that without an ability to be attuned. And that means, I heard your previous guest, holding space. That's what holding space is. So in a way, I feel like these terminologies of attunement, it's just a different way of describing what already works and is in practice in many communities and grassroots organizing and indigenous wisdom. And it's just a slightly different slant on what works for us as human beings to navigate, crises, volatility, and to move forward proactively to build more resilience.
Yeah, I mean, resilience is definitely necessary, and especially right now. And I think with existential threats, because we don't see them. In this case, it's like even when it's 67 degrees in Chicago today and only 50 degrees in California, we still don't see it in the same sense as something like like a car crashing right in front of us, right? So when trying to work with people, like you talked about being a guide. Can you explain a little bit about what it is to be a guide and to try to guide someone into this space?
Sure. So again, it goes back to keeping in mind that these issues are triggering, traumatic, distressing on a whole variety of levels for all kinds of people. The concept of guiding really comes, it's inspired by the research in the public health sector around how can we be truly effective at driving change, and particularly hard change and behavioral changes, even when these issues are life-threatening. So people on the front lines in clinical practice in the public health sector have been dealing with this for many, many decades, right? Where trying to help people, trying to kind of influence shifts around whether it's drug addiction or whether it's diet or whatever. And what they found over the years is a mode of relating with people through the lens of guiding is what ultimately allows for the most capacity and ability to change. Being a guide is fundamentally about recognizing that the other has their own autonomy, integrity, volition for change. It's coming to our work with deep humility. It's having a way of relating with our own sense of high stakes and urgency, and being able to manage that and really allow the other to come forward. And the practice of guiding is largely through listening. It's through asking questions. It's through drawing out and holding space. But it's more than drawing out and holding space. Guiding is also about directing, right? It's about providing resources. It's about providing partnership, allyship, right? But it's not coming from that place of, I know what's best for you. I'm going to push this on you. Let me tell you all the things that are going on and what's wrong with you. Don't you care? You idiot, you're not doing more. That's a mood that I observe a lot in the climate space, understandably, because the stakes are very high. But a guiding approach kind of flips it on its head. And it really asks us, I think, to level up. And part of that leveling up is it really comes back to this ability to have that humility, which is really hard when, for a lot of people, I'm imagining watching this, are quite awake, right? In terms of seeing what's happening and watching, it's like it's horrifying. Like you're watching something unfold, and it's like, what is it going to take to get people to actually engage? And so that leads you would think that leads to, we have to shout louder, we have to push. And there's a place for that. There's a place for that. But there's also a place for how do we practice skillful engagement that comes at this through guiding, which is to say, hey, you know what? This is like really intense. This is heavy. This is really, really heavy. And if you feel like tuning out, there's nothing wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're a human being that's trying to manage your window of tolerance, your bandwidth. And I get it. I feel it. And how can I help? Like, how can I support? How can we work together on this and sort of partner on the path forward? So it's a bit of a mindset shift in how we do this work.
Well, Dr. Lertzman, this is so valuable for not only activists and guides who are deep in this work, but for people who are getting into it. I'm so glad that they've had an opportunity to hear you, because it really it lets individuals know that if you are working with folks who are creating that environment that makes you feel completely overwhelmed, that there's probably a different opportunity for you to work with folks who don't make you feel that way. So thank you very much for coming in and talking with us. Your work and your voice is so important in this space. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a lot of work to be done, and it is truly overwhelming. But I recycle, I reduce, I reuse, all those things, and
and all of these things make a difference. I mean, I think we have a tendency to kind of measure ourselves against what other people are doing, and a lot of people, especially right now, they're doing the best they can. And we've all got to, do what we are able to do, but also, take a breath, give yourself a little grace, and acknowledge that it's okay if if you can't do it all right now, because it's a hard time to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially now during COVID and quarantine, it's like when we're thinking about the hierarchy of needs, a lot of us are just trying to, get up every morning and face the day. And so it's a lot to think about these existential sides. So everybody out there, don't feel bad if you're not recycling right now, is all I got to say. It is time to name the winner of this week's Oh for Fuck's Sake Award, given each week to the most inane, offensive, and dangerous character in politics. Our nominees were Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. For those who didn't win, remember, it's a dishonor just to be nominated.
Yeah, it really is. And the winner of the losers this week is Lauren Boebert. Congratulations, Lauren, because you're never satisfied by how low you've gone. You just keep going lower. Priority one for you seems to be finding a way to take down that wall. The pointless wall on the southern border? Nope. Can't be the Berlin Wall. No, you want to take down the protective fencing around the Capitol because I guess it's infringing on the rights of your seditionist friends to launch armed insurrection, the return of QAnon. We really don't need the sequel. It's not just that you're a dumb version of Sarah Palin, which I, honest to God, did not even know was possible. You're dangerous. And you're also this week's loser among losers. So, hey, congrats or something.
Yeah, or something. Lauren Boebert is never going to change. Highly unlikely. I do believe in change, but I don't know about for her. But the rest of us, we can work together to push forward change that we need. Here are a few things you can do. Climate Justice Alliance puts race, gender, and class at the center of any climate solutions equation. You can check out that organization. You can also check out Mothers Out Front. They're a national group working at the intersection of climate, racial, and social justice. And Grassroots International partners with movements around the world to defend human rights and the planet. Global Grassroots Alliance was founded 19 years ago. It connects grassroots community and organizers from low-income communities with social justice movements outside of the U.S.
And we'd love to hear what some of your takeaways from tonight's show are. We love hearing from you on all the different platforms. We, honest to God, go back when the show is over and read through comments and chats, and not only are you people brilliant, but you're really freaking funny. So we love going in and reading what you have to say. On Twitter, I'm at LC Senecal, and Maya is at Maya on Stage. So please do hit us up. Let us know what you're thinking, what you want to hear from us. And don't miss the breakdown tomorrow. It is on at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 Pacific, with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. They're always a good time, so don't miss it.
Yeah, for sure. And we are back next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on LPTV, the Lincoln Project's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And in the meantime, please hashtag us at We're Speaking, give us a call, text us, Facebook, all of that.
Get vaccinated. Wear your mask. Don't listen to Greg Abbott. Good night, everybody.
Vaccinated. Good night.
I wish I had somebody to help me sing this. America, I love you, America. You see, my God, he done shed his face on thee. And you ought to love him for it, because he crowned my good. He told me he would. Every brotherhood. From sea to shining sea. Oh, Lord, I thank you, Lord.
Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.